What if the Empire won at Endor? Let's explore the depths of this dark scenario in the video. Luke Skywalker's lightsaber ignites with a crimson glow. His eyes burn yellow with hatred as he stands over Princess Leia's broken body. The rebellion is dead. Han Solo lies bleeding in the forest below. And the galaxy's greatest hope has just become its darkest nightmare. This is what victory looks like when everything goes wrong. One moment changed everything. One decision that should have saved the galaxy instead doomed it to eternal darkness. The Death Star 2 still orbits Endor, its super laser having just vaporized the last of the rebel fleet. Luke Skywalker, the Chosen One, the last Jedi, has fallen completely to the dark side. But how did we get here? How did the galaxy's beacon of hope become the Emperor's perfect weapon? It started with a trap, the perfect trap. The forest moon of Endor burns as Imperial reinforcements tear through rebel lines like a scythe through wheat. Han Solo crouches behind twisted wreckage, blood streaming from his shoulder. Chewbacca's bowcaster clicks empty for the third time. Around them, the forest dies. This wasn't supposed to happen. The shield generator should have fallen. The Death Star should be vulnerable. Instead, Emperor Palpatine's trap springs shut with mechanical precision, crushing the rebellion's last desperate gambit. General Han Solo crouches behind the twisted wreckage of what was once an AT-ST Walker, his breathing labored and his left shoulder bleeding from a grazing blaster shot. Chewbacca roars in anguish beside him, the Wookiee's bowcaster clicking empty for the third time in 10 minutes. Around them, the forest burns. The shield generator bunker, their primary objective, stands intact and heavily defended just 50 meters away. "We're pinned down," Han mutters into his comlink, hoping Princess Leia can hear him wherever she is. "The whole plan's gone to hell, Leia. If you can hear this, get out. Get everyone out. This was a trap from the beginning." But Leia Organa cannot respond. She lies unconscious beneath a pile of debris 20 meters away, her white combat suit stained with dirt and blood. A concussion grenade had thrown her against a massive tree trunk during the initial Imperial counterattack. Only the quick thinking of 2 rebel commandos, who dragged her to cover before being cut down themselves, saved her from immediate execution. Wicket, the brave Ewok warrior who had first befriended Leia, makes one final desperate charge toward the Imperial position. His small form weaves between blaster bolts with surprising agility, his stone-tipped spear raised high. For a moment, it seems he might actually reach the stormtroopers. Then a burst of automatic fire from a heavy repeater cuts him down just meters from his target. The Ewok hero falls without a sound, his body tumbling into a patch of colorful wildflowers that are slowly being consumed by the spreading fires. High above the moon's surface, the battle for the galaxy's future rages in the cold vacuum of space. Admiral Jeel Akbar stands on the bridge of the Mon Calamari cruiser, Home 1, his salmon-colored hands gripping the command console as he watches his fleet die. The Death Star 2, its shields still intact thanks to the ground team's failure, methodically destroys ship after ship with its planet-killing super laser. The massive beam lances out again, this time vaporizing the Nebulon B frigate Redemption in a brilliant flash of light. 300 souls, including some of the rebellion's most experienced pilots and technicians, are snuffed out in an instant. Akbar closes his large, bulbous eyes for a moment, feeling each death as a personal failure. When he opens them again, his tactical display shows 17 more ships lost in just the past 5 minutes. It's a trap, he whispers to himself, the words he had spoken earlier now taking on a prophetic weight. They knew. Somehow, they knew everything about our plan. Lieutenant Telsi, Akbar's trusted aide, approaches with a datapad showing casualty reports. Sir, we've lost 60% of our capital ships. The fighters are taking even heavier losses. General Calrissian is requesting permission to pull back his squadrons. Akbar stares at the tactical display, watching as red dots representing Imperial ships continue to appear at the edges of the engagement zone. More reinforcements. Always more reinforcements. How many ships does the Empire have? Where do they find so many crews willing to die for tyranny? On the far side of the battle, Lando Calrissian fights for his life in the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon. The familiar ship feels different under his hands, heavier somehow, as if it knows its true pilot lies bleeding on the forest moon below. Nien Nunb, his Salustan co-pilot, chatters nervously in his native language while working frantically to reroute power from damaged systems. "Come on, baby," Lando mutters to the ship, pulling hard on the controls to avoid another burst of turbolaser fire from a pursuing Star Destroyer. "Han always said you were lucky. Don't let that luck run out now." But luck, it seems, has abandoned the rebellion entirely. As Lando brings the Falcon around for another attack run on the Death Star's surface, hoping against hope to find some weakness in its superstructure, the massive battle station's main weapon swivels toward another target. The Mon Calamari cruiser, Liberty. The ship, home to nearly 8,000 beings, including many civilian refugees, has no chance to escape. The super laser beam punches through the Liberty's shields as if they were made of paper. The proud ship, which had survived countless battles against the Empire, buckles and breaks apart in seconds. Lando watches in horror as the debris field expands, knowing that among those fragments are the remains of friends, allies, and innocents who had believed in the dream of freedom. "No, no, no," he whispers, his voice breaking. "This isn't how it's supposed to end." But inside the Death Star 2's throne room, Emperor Palpatine watches the destruction with visible satisfaction. His yellow eyes gleam with malevolent pleasure as each rebel ship meets its end. The massive viewport provides a perfect view of the carnage, and he has positioned his throne to take full advantage of the spectacle. "Young Skywalker," he says without turning around, his voice carrying that familiar mixture of paternal warmth and underlying menace. "Are you enjoying the show? Your friends are performing admirably, though I fear their final act is upon us." Luke Skywalker stands behind the Emperor's throne, his lightsaber drawn, but not yet ignited. His blue eyes, once filled with hope and determination, now reflect only the cold light of the explosions outside. He has been watching his friends die for nearly an hour, and each death carves away another piece of his soul. "They're brave," Luke says quietly, his voice hollow. "Even knowing they can't win, they keep fighting." "Brave, yes," Palpatine agrees, finally turning to face his captive. "But bravery without wisdom is merely another form of stupidity. Your rebel friends are dying because they chose to oppose the natural order. They are dying because they believed in fairy tales instead of accepting reality. The Emperor rises from his throne and approaches Luke slowly, like a predator stalking wounded prey. His gnarled hands clasp behind his back, and his yellow teeth show in what might charitably be called a smile. "You could end their suffering, you know," he continues. "One stroke of your lightsaber, and this painful charade ends. Your friends die quickly instead of slowly. The galaxy finds peace under proper leadership. All you have to do is embrace what you already know to be true." Luke's grip on his lightsaber tightens. "I'll never join you. My father may be lost, but I'm not. I still believe in the good in people. Do you?" Palpatine asks, gesturing toward the viewport. "Tell me, young Skywalker, where is the good in watching your friends burn? Where is the nobility in allowing thousands to die for a hopeless cause? Your father stands right there, and he has chosen his side. The only question remaining is whether you will choose reality or fantasy." Darth Vader has remained silent throughout this exchange, standing like a black monolith near the throne room's entrance. His mechanical breathing provides a rhythmic counterpoint to the distant sounds of battle filtering through the station's hull. But inside his helmet, Anakin Skywalker wages a war that threatens to tear him apart. He sees his son's face, so young yet already marked by the pain of leadership and loss. He remembers another young man who had stood at a crossroads between light and darkness, who had made the wrong choice and condemned the galaxy to decades of suffering. The parallels are too obvious to ignore, and they fill him with a mixture of regret and desperate hope. But hope, he has learned, is a dangerous emotion for someone who has fallen as far as he has. Hope leads to disappointment, and disappointment leads to anger, and anger leads to the dark side. Better to accept what cannot be changed than to rage against the inevitable. Outside the throne room, the battle continues its inexorable course toward rebel defeat. Captain Gilad Pellaeon, commanding the Star Destroyer Chimera from the Imperial Fleet's forward position, watches his tactical display with professional satisfaction. The trap has worked perfectly. Intelligence reports had indicated that the rebels would attempt to destroy the Death Star by first eliminating the shield generator on Endor's moon. Imperial planners had used that knowledge to create an ambush of unprecedented scale. "Sir," reports Lieutenant Hammerly from the communications station, "Admiral Piet sends his compliments and requests permission to begin the final phase of the operation." Pellaeon nods curtly. "Granted. Signal all ships. Commence Operation Emperor's Will." Let's finish this. Across the Imperial fleet, thousands of additional TIE fighters launch from their carrier ships. These are not the standard models that have been engaging the rebels for the past hour, but specialized interceptors and bombers equipped with the latest technology. Their mission is simple: eliminate every rebel ship that attempts to flee the battle zone. There will be no survivors to carry word of this defeat to other systems. Back on Endor's surface, the last act of the ground battle plays out with brutal efficiency. Han Solo, his ammunition finally exhausted, makes a desperate gambit. Rising from cover with his hands raised, he calls out to the Imperial commander in a voice that carries across the clearing. "I surrender. Don't shoot. I'm General Han Solo of the Rebel Alliance, and I'm willing to negotiate." Commander Igar raises his hand, signaling his troops to hold fire. Through his helmet's enhanced optics, he studies the legendary Corellian smuggler turned rebel hero. Here is a man whose exploits have become the stuff of Imperial intelligence briefings. and propaganda warnings. Capturing him alive would be a significant prize. But as Han takes his first step into the open, a blaster bolt sears through the air and catches him in the chest. The shot comes not from the Imperial troops, but from a concealed position in the forest behind him. A dying Ewok warrior, clutching a captured stormtrooper blaster, had used his final moments to ensure that the Empire's greatest prize would not be taken alive. Han Solo collapses to the forest floor, his hand reaching instinctively toward where Leia lies unconscious. His lips move soundlessly, forming words that will never be heard. "I love you." Then, the light fades from his eyes, and one of the galaxy's greatest heroes becomes another casualty in the Empire's inexorable march toward total victory. Chewbacca's roar of grief and rage echoes through the forest like the cry of a wounded beast. The massive Wookiee charges toward his fallen friend, heedless of the blaster fire that immediately erupts around him. Multiple shots strike his broad chest and shoulders, but his momentum carries him forward until he can cradle Han's body in his great arms. Commander Egar watches this display of loyalty with something approaching respect. He raises his hand again, and the firing stops. "Let them have their moment," he orders his troops. "Even enemies deserve to mourn their dead." But the moment passes quickly. Within minutes, Chewbacca is surrounded by stormtroopers and forced to surrender. His growls of defiance gradually fade to whimpers of grief as he is fitted with restraints designed specifically for his species. The last free rebel on Endor's surface, he is dragged away to await transport to an Imperial detention facility. Princess Leia regains consciousness just in time to witness her friend's capture. Hidden beneath debris and barely able to move, she watches through pain-blurred vision as the Wookiee is forced into an Imperial transport. Every instinct screams at her to act, to fight, to do something, but her body refuses to obey. The concussion has left her weak and disoriented, barely able to focus her thoughts. Through her comlink, she hears scattered transmissions from the space battle above. Admiral Akbar's voice, normally so composed and confident, cracks with emotion as he reports the loss of yet another ship. General Calrissian's desperate calls for reinforcements that will never come. The gradual realization among all rebel commanders that their cause is lost. "Luke," she whispers, her voice so weak that the comlink barely picks it up. "Luke, can you hear me? We need you. The galaxy needs you." But Luke Skywalker, standing in the Emperor's throne room hundreds of miles above, is fighting his own losing battle. The sight of his friend's destruction has pushed him to the very edge of despair, and Palpatine's words continue to eat away at his resolve like acid on metal. "Your sister calls to you," the Emperor notes with amusement, having somehow intercepted Leia's transmission. "Even now, she believes you can save her. Such touching faith in her doomed brother. Shall we show her how wrong she is?" With a gesture, Palpatine activates a holographic display showing the battle on Endor's surface. Luke watches in horror as Imperial troops drag Chewbacca away, as Han Solo's body is loaded onto a transport, as his sister lies broken and helpless in the forest. The images are too much to bear. "Stop it," Luke says, his voice rising. "Stop showing me this." "Why should I stop?" Palpatine asks with mock innocence. "This is reality, young Skywalker. This is what happens when idealistic fools challenge the natural order. Your friends are dying because of choices you made, roads you chose to walk. Their blood is on your hands, as surely as if you had killed them yourself." "That's not true," Luke protests. But his voice lacks conviction. Deep in his heart, he wonders if the Emperor might be right. If he had been stronger, smarter, more ruthless, could he have prevented this catastrophe? Could he have found a way to save his friends without condemning the galaxy to continued imperial rule? Isn't it? Palpatine presses. You knew this attack was dangerous. You knew the odds of success were minimal, yet you allowed them to proceed because you believed in destiny, in the Force, in all those pretty lies the Jedi taught you. How many have died because of your faith in fairy tales? The Emperor moves closer to Luke, his yellow eyes boring into the young man's soul. You have power, he continues, more power than any Jedi who has ever lived, yet you waste it on sentiment and hope, instead of using it to bring order to chaos. You could rule this galaxy wisely and justly, but first you must be willing to accept that some deaths are necessary for the greater good. Luke's lightsaber trembles in his hand as he struggles with emotions that threaten to overwhelm him. The rational part of his mind knows that Palpatine is manipulating him, using his grief and guilt as weapons. But the emotional part, the part that feels responsible for every death in the battle raging outside, finds the Emperor's words sickeningly logical. Join me, Palpatine whispers, extending one gnarled hand. Help me bring order to the galaxy. Your friends' deaths will not be meaningless if they serve to teach you the truth about power and its proper use. Together, we can prevent future wars, future suffering. All you have to do is accept what you already know in your heart. Luke looks at his father, hoping to see some sign of support or guidance. But Vader's mask reveals nothing, and his silence speaks volumes. The man who was once Anakin Skywalker, the chosen one, who was supposed to bring balance to the Force, has chosen his path long ago. There will be no help from that quarter. The moment stretches like a taut wire, filled with possibilities and consequences that will echo through galactic history. In the space between heartbeats, Luke Skywalker makes his choice. His lightsaber ignites with a snap hiss, its blue blade casting strange shadows on the throne room walls. But instead of striking at the Emperor, he turns the weapon toward the massive viewport overlooking the battle. His young face, once so full of hope and determination, now reflects only cold rage and bottomless despair. If this is the galaxy's choice, he says, his voice barely above a whisper, then let it burn. The lightsaber blade pierces the transparent steel with a sound like breaking crystal. Alarms immediately begin wailing throughout the Death Star as the viewport's structural integrity fails. Emergency blast doors slam shut, sealing the throne room. But not before Luke has gotten a final glimpse of his friends dying in the void. Good, Palpatine says, his voice rich with satisfaction. Your anger makes you strong, young Skywalker. Your hatred gives you clarity. Now, strike me down with all of your fury, and your journey toward the dark side will be complete. But Luke does not strike. Instead, he stands frozen, his lightsaber still extended toward the sealed viewport. The magnitude of what he has just chosen crashes over him like a wave, threatening to drown him in self-loathing and regret. Yet beneath the surface emotions, something else stirs. A dark satisfaction at the thought of power, of being able to impose his will on a galaxy that seems determined to choose suffering over peace. Vader watches his son's transformation with a mixture of triumph and loss. He had hoped, in the deepest recesses of his mechanical heart, that Luke would find a way to resist the Emperor's manipulation. But perhaps this outcome is inevitable. Perhaps the Skywalker bloodline is simply cursed to bring more pain than hope to the galaxy. The battle in space continues for another hour, but the outcome is never in doubt. One by one, the rebel ships are destroyed or disabled. Admiral Akbar goes down with his flagship, choosing to ram the home one into an Imperial Star Destroyer rather than surrender. The explosion is visible from the Death Star's observation decks, a brief star that burns bright and then fades to nothing. Lando Calrissian makes one final desperate run at the Death Star's surface, hoping to find some weakness that the technical readouts missed. But the massive station's defenses are too strong, and the Millennium Falcon finally succumbs to concentrated turbolaser fire. The ship that carried Luke from Tatooine to his destiny breaks apart in a shower of sparks and debris, taking with it the last symbols of the rebellion's heroic age. On Endor's surface, Imperial troops begin the systematic execution of captured rebels and their Ewok allies. The orders come directly from the Death Star. No prisoners, no survivors. The forest moon that had briefly harbored hope for galactic freedom becomes a charnel house, its ancient trees bearing witness to atrocities that will never be officially recorded. Princess Leia, still hidden beneath debris and barely conscious, listens to the sounds of blaster fire echoing through the forest. She knows what those sounds mean, knows that each shot represents another life snuffed out by Imperial brutality. Her comlink continues to receive scattered transmissions from dying rebels. Their final words, a mixture of defiance and despair. C-3PO and R2-D2, who had been performing reconnaissance near the shield generator bunker, are discovered by an Imperial patrol and immediately marked for destruction. The Golden Protocol droid's final words, before a stormtrooper's blaster reduces him to scrap metal, are a lament for his fallen masters and a prayer that somewhere in the galaxy, hope might yet survive. R2-D2, his dome sparking from blaster damage, manages to record one final message before his systems fail permanently. The message is simple, a holographic recording of Luke Skywalker as he once was, young and idealistic, speaking of his belief that there is good in everyone, even in his father. It is a message that will never be seen by anyone, lost in the ruins of a droid that dreamed of a better galaxy. The Emperor's triumph is complete within 6 hours of the battle's beginning. Every rebel ship has been destroyed or captured. Every resistance leader is dead or in Imperial custody. The shield generator on Endor remains operational, protecting the Death Star 2 as it prepares for its next mission, the complete subjugation of any world that has ever shown sympathy for the rebel cause. Luke Skywalker, now dressed in the black robes of a Sith apprentice, stands beside his master as they review reports of the victory. His transformation has been swift and total. His fall to the dark side accelerated by the trauma of watching his friends die and his growing belief that only absolute power can bring order to chaos. The galaxy will learn from this example, Palpatine says as he examines casualty reports with obvious pleasure. Word of the rebellion's fate will spread to every system, every world. They will understand that resistance is not merely futile, but suicidal. Order will be restored, and peace will reign under our guidance." Luke nods, his young face already hardened by his embrace of the dark side. "What of the survivors?" he asks, his voice devoid of the warmth it once carried. "There are always survivors, hidden cells that will try to rebuild what we've destroyed." "Leave them," the Emperor replies with a dismissive wave. "Let them try to gather their pathetic forces. Their very existence will serve our purposes by providing an example of what happens to those who oppose us. Besides, you will need targets for your training, my young apprentice." The words hang in the air like a death sentence for countless beings across the galaxy. In the weeks and months that follow, Luke Skywalker will hunt down every remaining rebel cell, every hidden Jedi, every symbol of hope that still flickers in the darkness. His natural power, combined with his newfound hatred, will make him the most effective weapon the Empire has ever possessed. But Vader, watching his son's transformation from across the throne room, feels something stir within him that he thought had died long ago on the lava shores of Mustafar. It is regret, pure and simple, for the choices that led to this moment. In trying to save his son from the Jedi's influence, he may have delivered him to something far worse, his own fate. The holographic reports continue to stream in from across the galaxy as news of the rebellion's destruction spreads. On Tatooine, moisture farmers listen to Imperial broadcasts with growing dread. On Naboo, Queen Apailana goes into hiding as Imperial forces land to root out suspected rebel sympathizers. On Kashyyyk, Wookiee villages burn as the Empire takes its revenge for Chewbacca's participation in the rebellion. But perhaps the most significant report comes from Coruscant itself, where massive crowds gather in the streets to celebrate the Empire's victory. The footage shows beings of dozens of species cheering as holographic displays show the destruction of the rebel fleet. Some celebrate out of genuine loyalty to the Empire. Others do so out of fear, knowing that any sign of sympathy for the rebellion could mark them for death. It is a sobering reminder that the galaxy the rebels fought to free was never entirely united behind their cause. For every world that supported the rebellion, there were three that either supported the Empire or simply wanted to be left alone. The dream of galactic freedom that burned so brightly in the hearts of Luke Skywalker and his friends was never shared by the majority of galactic citizens. Now, with the rebellion's leadership dead and its military forces destroyed, that dream seems more distant than ever. The Empire has proven that resistance is not only futile, but also self-destructive. The message is clear: submit or be destroyed, cooperate or face annihilation. In the detention cells of the Death Star 2, Princess Leia slowly regains consciousness in a Bacta tank. The healing fluid has repaired most of her physical injuries, but the psychological wounds run far deeper. Through the transparent aluminum of her cell, she can see other prisoners, surviving rebel officers, captured pilots, and terrified civilians whose only crime was expressing sympathy for the rebellion's cause. A medical droid approaches her tank and begins the process of draining the Bacta fluid. Soon, she knows, she will be subjected to interrogation, torture, and eventually execution. But what disturbs her more than her own fate is the knowledge that the rebellion she served so faithfully has been utterly destroyed. The cell door slides open with a pneumatic hiss, and Leia expects to see Imperial interrogation specialists, or perhaps Darth Vader himself. Instead, she finds herself face to face with a figure in black robes whose presence sends chills down her spine. It takes her a moment to recognize the young man beneath the hood, and when she does, her heart breaks completely. "Luke," she whispers, her voice barely audible. "What have they done to you?" Luke Skywalker, now calling himself Darth Raven, regards his sister with eyes that have lost all warmth. His face, once so open and expressive, has become a mask of cold authority. The lightsaber hanging from his belt pulses with a crimson glow, its crystal corrupted by his fall to the dark side. "They have shown me the truth," he replies, his voice carrying the same mechanical undertones that characterize his father's speech. "The rebellion was built on lies and false hope. Our friends died because they refused to accept reality. You can avoid their fate if you choose wisdom over sentiment." Leia stares at her brother, searching desperately for some sign of the Luke she once knew. But the young man who had rescued her from the Death Star, who had believed so strongly in the possibility of redemption, seems to have vanished completely. In his place stands a stranger wearing her brother's face, but speaking with the Emperor's voice. "You're not Luke," she says firmly. "I don't know who you are, but you're not my brother." He would never serve the Empire willingly. He would never abandon everything he believed in. Wouldn't he? Luke asks, moving closer to her cell. "Tell me, sister, what did those beliefs accomplish? Han Solo is dead. Chewbacca is dead. The entire rebel fleet has been destroyed. Thousands of beings who trusted in the rebellion's promises have paid for those lies with their lives. Is that the legacy you want for your precious cause?" The words cut deep because Leia knows they contain a grain of truth. The rebellion's leaders had known that the attack on the Death Star was a desperate gamble, that failure would likely mean the destruction of their entire movement. They had chosen to take that risk because the alternative, living under Imperial rule forever, seemed worse than death. But now, faced with the reality of what that choice has cost, Leia finds herself questioning whether they made the right decision. Would it have been better to find some other way, some path that didn't require such terrible sacrifice? Could they have negotiated with the Empire, accepted some form of limited autonomy in exchange for peace? Luke seems to sense her doubt, and his expression softens slightly. "It's not too late," he says in a voice that carries an echo of his former compassion. "Join me, Leia. Help me bring order to the galaxy. Together, we can prevent future wars, future suffering. The power we possess as Skywalkers could be used to protect the innocent instead of sending them to pointless deaths." For a moment, Leia feels the temptation to accept his offer. The weight of leadership, the responsibility for so many deaths, the knowledge that her decisions have led to this catastrophe. It all presses down on her like a physical force. How easy it would be to surrender, to let someone else bear the burden of making impossible choices. But then she remembers Han Solo's last words, transmitted over the comlink just before he died. "Don't let them win, Princess. Don't let them take away what we fought for." She remembers the courage of the Ewoks who died defending their world, the sacrifice of pilots who flew into hopeless battles because they believed in something greater than themselves. "No," she says, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I won't betray everything they died for. I won't dishonor their memory by surrendering to the darkness. You may have my brother's face, but you're not him. Luke Skywalker would never ask me to abandon hope. Luke's expression hardens again, the brief glimpse of his former self vanishing like morning mist. "Then you have chosen your path," he says coldly. "The Emperor has plans for you, sister. Plans that will serve as an example to any others who might consider following your foolish example." He turns and walks toward the cell door, his black robes swirling around him like living shadow. But just before he reaches the threshold, he pauses and looks back at her one more time. "For what it's worth," he says quietly, "I am sorry. Sorry that you cannot see what I have learned. Sorry that you will suffer for your stubbornness. But mostly sorry that our parents' legacy must end in darkness instead of light." Then he is gone, leaving Leia alone with her despair and the growing realization that the galaxy has lost more than just a military leader in Luke Skywalker's fall. It has lost its symbol of hope, its proof that good can triumph over evil. Without that symbol, what reason do people have to resist? What reason do they have to believe that the Empire can be defeated? Days pass in a blur of interrogations and propaganda broadcasts. The Emperor personally oversees the creation of holographic recordings designed to break the spirit of any remaining rebel sympathizers. These recordings show the destruction of the rebel fleet in excruciating detail, emphasizing the futility of resistance and the price of defying imperial authority. But the most devastating propaganda tool is Luke himself. Recordings of the former Jedi Knight, now dressed in Sith robes and speaking of the necessity of order and the foolishness of hope, are broadcast across the galaxy. The message is clear. Even the rebellion's greatest hero has recognized the truth of imperial ideology. Resistance is not just futile. It is a form of mental illness that must be cured through proper re-education. The psychological impact of these broadcasts cannot be overstated. On dozens of worlds, hidden rebel cells dissolve as their members lose the will to continue fighting. Underground networks that took years to build collapse in a matter of days. As despair spreads like a plague through the galaxy's remaining free spirits, on Sullust, Nien Nunb's family receives word of their son's death aboard the Millennium Falcon and immediately reports their rebel sympathies to imperial authorities, hoping to avoid collective punishment. On Mon Calamari, Admiral Akbar's remaining supporters go into hiding so deep that they might as well have vanished from the galaxy entirely. On countless worlds, the dream of freedom dies. A quiet death as hope gives way to resignation. But the Empire is not content with mere surrender. Emperor Palpatine understands that true victory requires not just the defeat of his enemies, but their complete transformation into instruments of his will. The surviving rebels must not simply be eliminated, they must be converted, made to serve the very cause they once opposed. This philosophy shapes the Empire's treatment of Princess Leia, who becomes the centerpiece of a propaganda campaign designed to demonstrate the futility of resistance. Instead of executing her quickly, Imperial psychologists subject her to months of sophisticated mental conditioning designed to break her will and remake her into a model Imperial citizen. The process is overseen by Luke himself, who takes a personal interest in his sister's re-education. He visits her cell regularly, engaging her in philosophical discussions about the nature of power and responsibility. These conversations, recorded and broadcast throughout the galaxy, show the former rebel leader gradually coming to accept Imperial ideology. Of course, the broadcasts are carefully edited to hide the true nature of Leia's conditioning. They do not show the drugs, the sleep deprivation, the subtle psychological manipulation that slowly erodes her sense of identity. They do not reveal the techniques that turn her memories of the rebellion into sources of guilt and shame rather than inspiration. What the galaxy sees is a broken woman gradually coming to understand the error of her ways. They see her expressing regret for the deaths she caused, gratitude for the Empire's mercy, and eventually genuine enthusiasm for the New Order's goals. It is a masterpiece of propaganda, all the more effective because Leia's conversion appears to be genuine and voluntary. But the most devastating moment comes when Leia is brought before the Emperor himself in a public ceremony broadcast across the galaxy. Dressed in the white robes of a reformed citizen, she kneels before Palpatine's throne and formally renounces her allegiance to the rebellion. "I was wrong," she says, her voice carrying no trace of her former fire. "I led good people to their deaths in service of a naive dream. The Empire offers order, stability, and protection to its citizens. I ask forgiveness for my crimes and pledge my life to serving the greater good under Imperial leadership." The Emperor places one gnarled hand on her head in a gesture of benediction. "Your repentance is accepted, child," he says in a voice filled with paternal warmth. "Let your example show others that redemption is possible for those who choose wisdom over rebellion, order over chaos." The ceremony concludes with Leia being officially pardoned and assigned to a position in the Imperial Propaganda Ministry. Her new role will involve traveling to worlds where rebel sentiment still lingers and explaining why she came to embrace Imperial ideology. It is a final humiliation, turning the former leader of the rebellion into its most effective critic. But perhaps the cruelest aspect of Leia's fate is that her conversion is not entirely artificial. The psychological conditioning has been so thorough that she genuinely believes in what she is saying. The pain of losing Han, Luke, and the rebellion has been channeled into guilt over her role in their destruction. She has been made to feel responsible for every death, every moment of suffering caused by the war. In her reconditioned mind, the Empire represents safety and order, while the rebellion represents chaos and death. She has become a true believer in the very ideology she once opposed. And her belief is all the more powerful because it comes from a place of genuine trauma and loss. Luke watches his sister's transformation with complex emotions. Part of him is satisfied that she has finally seen reason and embraced the truth about power and its proper use. But another part, buried deep beneath years of conditioning and dark side corruption, mourns the loss of the bright, defiant woman who once stood up to Darth Vader without flinching. These conflicting feelings create a crack in Luke's dark side armor, a tiny flaw that will eventually grow into something larger. But for now, he pushes such doubts aside and focuses on his role as the Emperor's chosen instrument of galactic domination. His missions take him to dozens of worlds over the following months, hunting down the scattered remnants of the rebellion and any Force-sensitive individuals who might pose a threat to Imperial rule. His power grows stronger with each act of violence, each moment of despair he causes in others. The dark side feeds on such emotions, and Luke has become its perfect conduit. On Kashyyyk, he personally oversees the destruction of Wookiee tree cities that harbored rebel sympathizers. Entire communities are burned to the ground, their inhabitants enslaved or executed. The great forests that had stood for millennia are reduced to ash and char, their destruction serving as a warning to any other species that might consider harboring Imperial enemies. Luke feels no remorse as he watches the flames consume homes and sacred sites. In his mind, These beings chose their fate when they decided to support the rebellion. Their suffering is a natural consequence of their poor judgment, just as a child who touches fire must expect to be burned. The galaxy is learning valuable lessons about the cost of defying legitimate authority. On Naboo, Queen Apailana and her government are publicly executed for treason after evidence surfaces of their covert support for rebel operations. Luke personally ignites the pyres, using his lightsaber to start the flames that consume the bodies of beings who once called his step-grandmother friend. The symbolism is intentional. Even family connections cannot protect traitors from imperial justice. But it is on Tatooine that Luke's transformation becomes most complete, returning to the world of his birth for the first time since leaving with Obi-Wan. He finds a planet that has largely remained loyal to the Empire. The Lars family's moisture farm has been taken over by Imperial colonists, and the graves of Owen and Beru have been replaced with a monument to Imperial agricultural success. Luke stands in the spot where his aunt and uncle once lived and feels nothing but cold satisfaction. These beings had hidden the truth of his parentage and his potential, keeping him trapped in a life of mindless labor when he could have been training to serve the galaxy's true rulers. Their deaths, he now realizes, were not a tragedy, but a liberation. The binary sunset still paints the sky in brilliant oranges and reds, just as it did when he was a boy dreaming of adventure among the stars. But now he understands that those dreams were naive fantasies, unworthy of someone with his power and potential. True fulfillment comes not from adventure, but from order, not from freedom, but from control. As he stands, watching the sun set over the desert that shaped his youth, Luke makes a decision that will echo through galactic history. He activates his lightsaber and drives it deep into the sand, channeling dark side energy through the blade and into the planet's core. It is a symbolic gesture more than a practical one, but its meaning is clear. The boy who once dreamed of leaving Tatooine has finally killed that naive child forever. The ritual complete, Luke returns to his ship and departs for Coruscant, never to see his homeworld again. Behind him, the desert winds gradually cover the scar his lightsaber left in the sand. But the wound to the Force itself will take much longer to heal. Back in the Imperial capital, Emperor Palpatine reviews reports of his apprentice's activities with growing satisfaction. Luke has exceeded even his highest expectations, proving more ruthless and efficient than Vader had ever been. The young man's natural power, combined with his complete dedication to the dark side, makes him the perfect instrument for the Empire's continued expansion. But Palpatine is too wise to ignore the lessons of history. He knows that Sith apprentices inevitably turn on their masters, that the cycle of betrayal and revenge is as natural to the dark side as breathing. Luke's loyalty is absolute now, but power has a way of breeding ambition. And ambition has a way of overcoming even the strongest conditioning. The Emperor begins laying plans for his own protection, creating contingencies and fail-safes that will ensure his survival, even if Luke eventually challenges him. These plans involve not just military preparations, but also psychological ones. Ways to maintain his hold over his apprentice's mind, even as that mind grows stronger and more independent. Meanwhile, Vader finds himself in an increasingly uncomfortable position. Once the Emperor's primary enforcer, he has been relegated to secondary status as Luke takes on more and more responsibility for Imperial operations. It is a situation that should please him. His son is strong, successful, and properly dedicated to the dark side. But instead, it fills him with a growing unease. The problem, he realizes, is that Luke's fall to the dark side has been too complete, too perfect. There is no conflict in the young man, no doubt or hesitation. He has embraced evil with the same totality that he once embraced good, and that totality is somehow more disturbing than liberating. Vader remembers his own fall, how it had been driven by love and fear and desperate circumstances. His turn to the dark side had been a tragedy born of impossible choices and manipulated emotions. But Luke's transformation seems almost clinical, as if he had simply chosen the most logical path available to him. Perhaps that is what troubles Vader most, the realization that his son has not fallen to the dark side so much as he has risen to it. Luke genuinely believes that the Empire represents order and justice, that his actions serve the greater good. There is no internal conflict because he sees no moral ambiguity in what he does. This philosophical difference creates a subtle tension between father and son that grows stronger over time. When they train together in the Death Star's lower levels, Vader can sense Luke's complete dedication to dark side philosophy. The young man has no reservations, no hidden doubts, no secret longings for his former life. In a perverse way, Luke has become everything the Emperor hoped Vader would be: a perfect servant of the dark side, untroubled by conscience or sentiment. It is an achievement that should fill Vader with pride, but instead, it leaves him feeling strangely hollow. 5 years pass, and the galaxy settles into a new equilibrium under absolute Imperial rule. The Death Star construction program has produced a fleet of planet killers that patrol the major space lanes. Their presence, a constant reminder of the Empire's power. No world dares challenge Imperial authority when the price of rebellion is complete annihilation. The economy prospers under Imperial management. As resources are allocated efficiently and trade disputes are settled by Imperial decree rather than lengthy negotiations, crime rates plummet as Imperial justice proves both swift and final. For many citizens, life under the new order is more comfortable and secure than anything they experienced during the chaotic final years of the Republic. But this prosperity comes at a cost that extends far beyond mere political freedom. Art, literature, and music are all subject to Imperial censorship, their content carefully controlled to support approved themes and messages. Scientific research is directed toward military applications, with pure research discouraged as wasteful and potentially dangerous. Most significantly, the Force itself begins to change under the Empire's influence. With the Jedi extinct and Sith philosophy dominant, the dark side spreads like a cancer through the galaxy's spiritual energy field. Sensitive individuals find themselves drawn toward anger and hatred rather than compassion and wisdom. The very fabric of reality becomes more conducive to suffering than to hope. This spiritual corruption manifests in subtle but pervasive ways. Natural disasters become more frequent and more severe. Diseases spread faster and resist treatment longer. Even the stars themselves seem dimmer, their light filtered through a galaxy-spanning pall of despair and resignation. But not every flame of hope is extinguished. In the deepest reaches of the Outer Rim, beyond the Empire's direct control, scattered groups of survivors work to preserve something of what was lost. They are not rebels in the traditional sense. They lack the organization and resources for military resistance, but they keep alive the memory of a time when things were different. On the remote world of Jakku, Rey, a young scavenger, discovers ancient Jedi texts hidden in the wreckage of a crashed Republic cruiser. She cannot read the texts, but something in their presence calls to her, awakening abilities she doesn't understand. It will be years before she realizes the significance of her discovery, but the seeds of future resistance are planted. In that moment, on Lothal, the Ghost Crew's legacy lives on in the form of a small but dedicated group of freedom fighters led by Sabine Wren. They lack the resources for major operations, but they keep alive the spirit of rebellion through small acts of defiance and preservation of suppressed culture. Their existence proves that the Empire's victory, however complete, has not entirely crushed the desire for freedom. Even in the Imperial capital itself, cracks begin to appear in the facade of unity and loyalty. Some Imperial officers, horrified by the brutality they have witnessed, begin to question whether their cause is truly just. These doubts lead to quiet acts of sabotage and intelligence leaks that gradually accumulate into a significant problem for Imperial security. But perhaps the most significant crack in the Empire's foundation develops in an unexpected place: the relationship between Luke and his father. As the years pass, their philosophical differences become more pronounced, and their training sessions begin to resemble debates as much as combat practice. "Why do you hesitate?" Luke asks during one such session, his crimson lightsaber locked against Vader's in a contest of strength and will. "You taught me that power must be used decisively, without sentiment or doubt. Yet, I sense conflict in you, uncertainty about our mission." Vader pushes back against his son's blade, their weapons casting red shadows on the training room walls. "Power without wisdom is tyranny," he replies. "Strength without compassion is merely brutality. The Emperor has taught us to embrace our anger, but anger alone does not make us right." The words surprise both of them. Vader has not spoken such thoughts in decades, and he is not entirely sure where they came from. But something about his son's complete dedication to darkness has awakened memories of the man he used to be, the Jedi Knight, who believed that protecting the innocent was more important than imposing order. "You sound like a Jedi," Luke says with obvious distaste, breaking their blade lock and stepping back. "I thought such weakness had been burned out of you long ago." The Jedi's compassion led to the Republic's corruption and the galaxy's descent into chaos. "Their way failed, Father. Our way succeeds, does it?" Vader asks, deactivating his lightsaber. "Look around you, my son. We rule through fear and intimidation. We maintain order through the threat of annihilation. Is this truly the galaxy you want to create? Is this the legacy you want to leave for future generations?" Luke stares at his father in amazement. "The Emperor was right about you," he says slowly. "You are still weak, still infected by sentiment and false compassion. Perhaps it is time for a stronger hand to guide the Empire's destiny." The threat in Luke's words is unmistakable, and Vader recognizes it for what it is: the inevitable challenge that every Sith apprentice eventually makes to their master. But he also hears something else in his son's voice, something that chills him to the core. There is no passion in Luke's threat, no anger or hatred. It is delivered with the same cold efficiency he brings to all his actions. This realization forces Vader to confront a terrible truth. His son has not fallen to the dark side in the way he himself did. Where Vader's fall was driven by love twisted into possessiveness, fear transformed into rage, Luke's embrace of darkness appears to be purely intellectual. He serves the Empire not because he is consumed by passion, but because he genuinely believes it represents the best possible system of government. The difference is crucial because it means that Luke cannot be redeemed through emotional appeals the way Vader eventually was. You cannot save someone who does not believe they need saving, cannot free someone who sees their chains as choices freely made. This understanding begins to eat away at Vader's resolve and commitment to the Empire. If his son's fall is permanent and irreversible, then what meaning does his own continued service to the dark side have? He had told himself that he stayed with the Emperor to protect Luke, to ensure that his son's power would be properly channeled and controlled. But if Luke has become something beyond redemption, then Vader's sacrifice has been meaningless. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Darth Vader begins to change. The transformation is subtle at first. A moment of hesitation before executing a prisoner. A flash of regret after destroying a rebel cell. But it grows stronger over time. The mechanical monster who had terrorized the galaxy for decades starts to remember what it felt like to be human. The change does not go unnoticed by the Emperor, who has been watching both Vader and Luke carefully for signs of disloyalty or ambition. Palpatine recognizes that Vader's growing doubts could become a problem, but he also sees them as an opportunity to further consolidate Luke's loyalty. During a private meeting in the throne room, the Emperor plants seeds of suspicion in Luke's mind about his father's reliability and dedication to Imperial goals. He points out Vader's recent hesitations and suggests that the Dark Lord's age and past injuries may be affecting his judgment. "Your father has served me well," Palpatine says with feigned regret. "But I fear that his time of usefulness is drawing to a close. The cybernetics that keep him alive also limit his potential. He will never be able to embrace the dark side as completely as you have, my young friend. Perhaps it is time for a younger, more capable apprentice to take his place." Luke receives this suggestion with his typical cold calculation. If Lord Vader has become a liability to the Empire, he says, then logic dictates that he should be removed. I am prepared to do whatever is necessary for the greater good. The Emperor smiles at this response, pleased by Luke's willingness to consider patricide as merely another administrative decision. But he also knows that timing is crucial. Vader still has his uses, and removing him too early could create unnecessary complications. Not yet, Palpatine counsels. But be prepared, young Skywalker. The day may come when you must choose between your father and your duty to the galaxy. I trust that you will make the correct choice when that time arrives. Meanwhile, Vader senses the growing threat to his position, but finds himself strangely unconcerned. Death, which had once seemed like the ultimate defeat, now begins to appear as a form of liberation. If he dies, at least he will be free of the guilt and regret that have consumed him for decades. If he lives, he will continue to be complicit in the Empire's atrocities. But before he can find peace in either outcome, an unexpected development changes everything. Deep in the unknown regions, beyond the Empire's reach, a new threat begins to stir. Ancient enemies, awakened by the disturbances in the Force, caused by the Empire's spiritual corruption, start to move toward known space. These beings, calling themselves the Far Outsiders, represent something the galaxy has never faced before, a completely alien intelligence that exists outside the Force itself. They are immune to Jedi mind tricks and Sith lightning alike, and their technology operates on principles that no Republic or Imperial scientist has ever encountered. The first sign of their approach comes when Imperial scouts report the complete disappearance of several outer rim systems. Not destroyed, simply gone, as if they had never existed. Investigation reveals empty space where stars and planets should be, with no debris or energy signatures to indicate what happened. Emperor Palpatine initially dismisses these reports as sensor malfunctions or navigational errors. But as more systems vanish, he is forced to acknowledge that the Empire faces a genuine external threat. The irony is not lost on him. Just when his victory over the rebellion seemed complete, a new and potentially greater danger emerges from the darkness between galaxies. Luke is assigned to lead a task force investigating these disappearances, and what he finds shakes his faith in Imperial invincibility. The Far Outsiders' ships are utterly alien, constructed from what appears to be living metal that repairs itself and adapts to weapons fire. Their crews are equally bizarre, tall, pale beings, whose thoughts cannot be read through the Force and whose presence creates dead zones in the galaxy's spiritual energy field. The first battle between Imperial and Far Outsider forces is a disaster for the Empire. Despite overwhelming numerical superiority, the Imperial fleet is systematically destroyed by weapons that seem to operate outside known physical laws. Luke himself barely escapes when his flagship is consumed by some kind of entropy field that ages the ship's hull by millennia in seconds. For the first time since his fall to the dark side, Luke experiences something approaching fear. The Far Outsiders represent a form of power that cannot be understood or controlled through dark side techniques. They are completely alien, utterly hostile, and apparently unstoppable. Worse, their advance toward Imperial space seems to be accelerating. The Emperor calls an emergency session of the Privy Council to discuss the crisis. For the first time in years, military leaders are asked for their honest assessments rather than optimistic propaganda. The reports they deliver paint a grim picture. The Empire's forces, designed to fight rebels and maintain internal order, are completely unprepared for a conflict against an enemy that operates by unknown rules. Admiral Thrawn, one of the few Imperial commanders to have survived multiple encounters with Far Outsider forces, delivers a particularly sobering analysis. These beings do not think as we do, he tells the assembled leaders. They do not seek territory or resources in any sense we understand. Their goal appears to be the complete elimination of all life in our galaxy. Not for conquest, but for some incomprehensible philosophical purpose. The Emperor listens to these reports with growing alarm. He has spent decades consolidating power and eliminating potential rivals. But all of that effort becomes meaningless if an external force destroys the galaxy he seeks to rule. For the first time since his rise to power, Palpatine faces a problem that cannot be solved through manipulation or superior firepower. It is in this moment of crisis that Vader sees an opportunity for redemption, not just for himself, but for the galaxy as a whole. The Far Outsiders threaten everything and everyone, regardless of political affiliation or species. Imperial citizens and former rebels face equal extinction if this threat cannot be stopped. During a private conversation with Luke, Vader makes a proposal that shocks his son. Unite all of the galaxy's surviving forces, Imperial and otherwise, to face this common threat. It is a suggestion that goes against everything the Empire represents, an admission that even absolute power has its limitations. You cannot be serious. Luke responds with obvious incredulity. The rebellion is dead. The survivors are criminals and terrorists who deserve nothing but execution. You would have us ally with traitors and murderers? I would have us ally with anyone who can help defend our galaxy. Vader replies firmly. The far outsiders do not distinguish between Imperial citizens and rebel sympathizers. They will consume both with equal appetite. Our only hope of survival lies in unity, not division. But Luke's conditioning runs too deep for such appeals to logic. In his mind, the Empire represents order and civilization, while everything outside it represents chaos and barbarism. The idea of allying with former enemies is not just tactically questionable, but morally repugnant. If the Empire cannot defend the galaxy alone, Luke says coldly, then perhaps it does not deserve to survive. Better that we maintain our principles and die with honor than compromise our ideals and live as hypocrites. The philosophical divide between father and son has never been clearer. Vader, despite decades of serving the dark side, still retains some capacity for pragmatic adaptation. Luke, paradoxically, has become more rigid and dogmatic than even the most fanatical Imperial officer. This disagreement creates an opportunity for Emperor Palpatine, who has been monitoring their conversations through hidden surveillance devices. He recognizes that the far outsider crisis, while genuinely threatening, also provides a perfect excuse to finally eliminate Vader and cement Luke's loyalty beyond any possibility of future challenge. In a private meeting with Luke, the Emperor reveals the full extent of Vader's treasonous suggestions and frames them as evidence that the Dark Lord has been compromised by rebel sympathizers. He suggests that Vader may even be planning to use the crisis as an excuse to overthrow Imperial authority and restore some form of democratic government. Your father's weakness has finally overcome his loyalty, Palpatine tells Luke with feigned sorrow. He would have us surrender everything we have built in the name of temporary expedience. This cannot be allowed to stand. Luke receives this news with his typical emotional detachment, but he also experiences something new, a sense of personal betrayal. For years, he has looked up to his father as a model of dark side philosophy and imperial dedication. To learn that Vader has been harboring treasonous thoughts feels like discovering that his entire worldview has been built on a lie. "What would you have me do, Master?" he asks, though the answer is already clear in his mind. "You know what must be done," Palpatine replies. "The good of the Empire must come before personal relationships. Your father's usefulness has ended, and his continued existence poses a threat to everything we have worked to achieve. It is time for a new generation to take responsibility for the galaxy's future." Luke nods slowly, his decision made with the same cold logic he applies to all his choices. If Vader has indeed become a traitor to Imperial ideals, then he must be eliminated regardless of their familial relationship. Personal sentiment cannot be allowed to interfere with the greater good. The confrontation takes place in the same throne room where Luke first turned to the dark side 5 years earlier. Vader, summoned by the Emperor on the pretext of discussing far outsider defense strategies, arrives to find his son waiting for him with lightsaber drawn. "You know why you are here," Luke says without preamble. "Your recent suggestions regarding alliance with rebel survivors have been deemed treasonous. The Emperor has ordered your termination, and I am here to carry out that sentence." Vader looks at his son with something approaching pity. "You cannot see it, can you?" he asks sadly. "We are being manipulated, used against each other to serve the Emperor's purposes. He fears that united, we might challenge his authority. So he sets us at each other's throats like animals." "I see exactly what is happening," Luke replies, igniting his crimson lightsaber. "A failing apprentice seeks to corrupt his replacement with lies and false sentiment. Your weakness disgusts me, Father. I had hoped for better from the man who was once Anakin Skywalker." The name hits Vader like a physical blow, awakening memories he has spent decades trying to suppress. Images flash through his mind. Padmé's face as she lay dying, Obi-Wan's disappointed expression on Mustafar, the younglings in the Jedi Temple looking at him with trust and innocence just before he struck them down. "Anakin Skywalker is dead," he whispers, but the words lack their former conviction. "I destroyed him long ago, in service to the Emperor's vision. But perhaps it is time for both Anakin and Vader to die, so that something better might take their place." Luke advances with his lightsaber raised, but Vader makes no move to defend himself. Instead, he slowly removes his helmet, revealing the scarred and pale face beneath. His breathing, no longer filtered through the suit's respirator, becomes labored and painful. "If you must kill me, my son," he says, his voice now fully human, "then do it as yourself, not as the Emperor's weapon. Look into my eyes and see what your choices have made you become." For just a moment, Luke hesitates. Seeing his father's face, hearing his natural voice, awakens something in him that has been buried beneath years of conditioning and dark side philosophy. It is not compassion exactly, but a kind of recognition, an acknowledgement that this dying man was once something more than a tool of imperial policy. But the moment passes, and Luke's resolve hardens again. Whatever Anakin Skywalker might have been is irrelevant compared to what Darth Vader became. Sentiment is weakness, and weakness cannot be tolerated in service of the greater good. Luke's lightsaber pierces his father's chest with surgical precision, the crimson blade emerging from his back to cast red shadows on the throne room walls. Vader gasps once, his damaged lungs struggling to draw breath, then collapses to the polished floor. But as he dies, Vader manages one final act of defiance against the Emperor's will. With his last breath, he reaches out through the Force and broadcasts a message across the galaxy. Not words, but a feeling. A desperate plea for unity in the face of extinction. The message is felt by every Force-sensitive being in known space, from untrained children on backwater worlds to the handful of surviving Jedi hiding in the deepest reaches of the Outer Rim. It carries with it images of the far outsiders and their inexorable advance, along with a simple truth: only by working together can the galaxy hope to survive. Emperor Palpatine senses the message being sent and tries to interfere, but Vader's final act draws on reserves of power that the Dark Lord thought had been exhausted long ago. The plea for unity spreads faster than Imperial communications can counter it, reaching minds and hearts that have been closed to hope for years. On remote worlds and hidden bases, beings who had given up the fight against Imperial tyranny suddenly find themselves facing a choice: maintain their isolation and face extinction alone, or risk everything on one last desperate attempt to save their galaxy. Some choose to remain hidden, preferring certain death to uncertain alliance with former enemies. But others, enough to matter, begin the dangerous process of re-establishing contact with each other and coordinating resistance to both Imperial rule and the far outsider invasion. Luke stands over his father's body, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction at having eliminated a traitor to Imperial ideals. He has no idea that Vader's death has just sparked the beginning of a new rebellion, one that will prove far more dangerous to the Empire than anything that came before. But in the depths of space, moving steadily toward the galaxy's heart, the far outsider fleets continue their inexorable advance. They care nothing for Imperial politics or rebel dreams of freedom. Their only goal is the complete extinction of all life in this dimension, and they have the power to achieve it. The galaxy's only hope now lies in the hands of scattered survivors who must somehow find the strength to overcome decades of hatred and mistrust. They must forge an alliance between former enemies, united only by their shared desire to survive. But this hope faces challenges that seem insurmountable. The Empire's intelligence networks, refined over years of hunting rebel cells, quickly identify many of those who respond to Vader's final message. Within days of the Dark Lord's death, Imperial forces launch coordinated strikes against suspected meeting points and communication hubs. On Ryloth, an entire Twi'lek village is obliterated by orbital bombardment after Imperial surveillance detects suspicious gatherings. On Ord Mantell, a former rebel safehouse is raided just hours before a planned coordination meeting. Its occupants either killed or dragged away for interrogation. The Empire's response is swift, brutal, and terrifyingly efficient. Luke personally oversees many of these operations. His father's treasonous final act, having convinced him that any show of mercy or hesitation will be interpreted as weakness. He leads strike teams with clinical precision, eliminating targets with the same emotional detachment he might show when ordering supplies or reviewing tactical reports. During a raid on a suspected rebel cell hidden in the ruins of Aldera City on a refugee world, Luke encounters a group of Alderaanian survivors who have been secretly preserving their destroyed planet's cultural heritage. Among them is Bail Organa's former aide, now elderly and frail, who recognizes Luke despite his transformation. "You were supposed to be our hope," she whispers as Imperial stormtroopers drag her away. "Leia believed in you. She died believing you would save us all. How did you become the very monster we fought against?" Luke watches her execution without expression, but her words linger in his mind longer than they should. That night, in the privacy of his meditation chamber aboard the Death Star, he finds himself remembering his sister not as the reformed Imperial citizen she became, but as the fierce princess who had once stood up to Darth Vader himself. The memory is troubling because it suggests that his recollections of Leia's conversion might not be entirely accurate. But such doubts are dangerous, and Luke pushes them aside with practiced ease. The past is the past. What matters is the present, and the present demands absolute loyalty to imperial ideals. Meanwhile, Emperor Palpatine accelerates his preparations for the far outsider threat. Deep in the unknown regions, massive construction projects begin as entire star systems are converted into fortress worlds. The Empire's industrial capacity, freed from the need to fight internal rebellions, is redirected toward creating defenses against an enemy that operates by unknown rules. But these preparations reveal a troubling truth. The Empire's military doctrine, perfected through decades of fighting humanoid opponents with predictable tactics, is fundamentally unsuited for combat against the far outsiders. Imperial strategists struggle to develop effective countermeasures against weapons that seem to violate basic physical laws. Grand Admiral Thrawn, recalled from his exile in the unknown regions, presents a classified briefing to the Emperor that paints the situation in stark terms. "Our conventional forces are useless against these beings," he reports with characteristic bluntness. "They consume energy weapons, adapt to projectile attacks, and their ships regenerate damage faster than we can inflict it. We need new tactics, new technologies, and above all, new thinking." The Emperor receives this assessment with visible displeasure. Since his rise to power, he has prided himself on having solutions to every problem, contingencies for every threat. The idea that his empire might face an enemy it cannot defeat through superior firepower and ruthless tactics is almost inconceivable. "What do you recommend, Admiral?" Palpatine asks, his voice carrying undertones of menace that would terrify most Imperial officers. But Thrawn is not most officers. He has faced the far outsiders in direct combat and survived, an experience that has given him insights no other Imperial commander possesses. "We must study them as we would study any enemy," he replies calmly. "Learn their weaknesses, understand their motivations, and adapt our methods accordingly. But first, we must survive their initial assault." The far outsiders' advance into Imperial space begins with the systematic elimination of outer rim fortress worlds. These heavily defended systems, each one protected by multiple Death Stars and vast fleets, fall with shocking speed. The pattern is always the same. The alien ships appear without warning. Their weapons strip away Imperial defenses like tissue paper, and then the worlds themselves simply cease to exist. Luke leads a massive task force to intercept the far outsider fleet at the Corellian system, hoping to make a stand in space that has symbolic as well as strategic importance. The battle that follows becomes the largest single engagement in galactic history, with over 10,000 Imperial ships facing an enemy force that seems to violate every principle of naval architecture. The far outsider vessels are living things as much as machines, their hulls pulsing with organic rhythms, while their weapons fire streams of what can only be described as crystallized entropy. When Imperial turbolasers strike their targets, the enemy ships don't explode or burn. They adapt, their hulls becoming immune to whatever energy frequency was used against them. Luke watches from the bridge of his flagship as an entire Imperial fleet is systematically dismantled by enemies who seem to learn from every attack. Star destroyers that have dominated space lanes for decades are reduced to expanding clouds of debris in minutes. Death Stars, the ultimate symbols of Imperial might, are consumed by entropy fields that age their superstructures into cosmic dust. For the first time since his fall to the dark side, Luke experiences something approaching panic. The power he has spent years cultivating, the dark side strength that made him the Emperor's perfect weapon, seems useless against enemies who exist outside the Force entirely. His attempts to manipulate the battle through Sith techniques fail completely. As if the far outsiders exist in a reality where such abilities simply don't function. The Imperial retreat from Corellia is a route that costs the Empire nearly half its remaining military strength. Luke's flagship barely escapes the system before the far outsiders deploy some kind of dimensional weapon that causes the Corellian sun to collapse into a black hole, taking the entire system with it. Back on Coruscant, the Emperor receives reports of the defeat with growing alarm. For the first time in his long life, Palpatine faces the possibility of absolute failure, of an end to his plans that comes not through political maneuvering or Sith rivalry, but through the simple fact of extinction. It is in this moment of crisis that an unexpected message reaches the Imperial capital. The transmission comes from the deep core, from a region thought to be completely under Imperial control. But the being who appears on the holographic display is someone the Emperor thought long dead. Ahsoka Tano, older now but still recognizably, the former Jedi Padawan who had once walked away from the Order. Chancellor Palpatine, she says, using his old title with obvious irony. I know you remember me. I also know that you're facing an enemy you can't defeat with fear and brutality. The far outsiders don't respond to the tactics that have served you so well against your own people. They're going to kill every living being in this galaxy, unless we work together to stop them. The transmission continues with a proposal that shocks even Luke. A temporary alliance between the surviving resistance movements and the Empire, pooled resources and coordinated strategy in the face of mutual extinction. Ahsoka provides evidence that scattered groups of survivors have been studying the far outsiders' weaknesses, developing weapons and tactics that might actually prove effective against the alien threat. The Emperor's initial reaction is predictable rage at the suggestion that the Empire needs help from terrorists and traitors. But as more reports arrive detailing the far outsiders' continued advance, the scope of the threat becomes undeniable. 3 more core worlds vanish in the space of a single day, their populations numbering in the billions, simply erased from existence. Luke argues against any negotiation with the Resistance, insisting that the Empire's principles must be maintained even in the face of extinction. Better to die with honor than live through compromise, he tells the Emperor, echoing the same rigid thinking that has characterized his entire approach to Imperial service. But Palpatine, for all his evil, is fundamentally a survivor. He recognizes that ideological purity means nothing if there's no one left alive to practice it. Reluctantly, he authorizes secret negotiations with the resistance groups, though he makes it clear that any alliance will be temporary and conditional. The first meeting between Imperial and Resistance representatives takes place on Naboo, chosen for its symbolic significance, as both the Emperor's homeworld and one of the few core systems that still retains some measure of autonomy. Luke attends reluctantly, his presence a reminder of how far the galaxy has fallen from its former ideals. The Resistance delegation includes faces Luke never expected to see again. Ahsoka Tano heads the group, her presence a living reminder of the Jedi tradition that the Empire thought it had destroyed. Beside her stands Ezra Bridger, older and scarred, but still alive, despite Imperial efforts to eliminate him. There are others too. Former rebel pilots, surviving senators from worlds the Empire conquered, even a few former Imperial officers who defected after witnessing atrocities they could no longer stomach. But the most shocking presence is that of Mara Jade, the Emperor's former hand, who had supposedly died during a mission in the unknown regions years earlier. Her survival and her presence among the Resistance represents a betrayal that cuts deeper than any military defeat. "You were loyal," Luke says to her during a break in negotiations, his voice containing the first trace of genuine emotion he has shown in years. "The Emperor trusted you above all others. Why did you abandon your duty?" Mara looks at him with something that might be pity. "I saw what you became," she replies quietly. "What we all became in service to his vision. The Emperor doesn't inspire loyalty, Luke. He manufactures it through fear and conditioning. I broke free of that conditioning. The question is whether you ever will." The negotiations themselves prove nearly impossible. 5 years of Imperial brutality have created wounds that run too deep for easy healing. The Resistance representatives have lost friends and family to Luke's purges, while Imperial officers bristle at the suggestion that they should take orders from terrorists and traitors. But gradually, painfully, a framework for cooperation begins to emerge. The Resistance possesses intelligence about far outsider weaknesses that Imperial scientists have been unable to discover. The Empire still controls the galaxy's industrial base and most of its military resources. Neither side can defeat the alien threat alone, but together they might have a chance. The key breakthrough comes when Ahsoka reveals the existence of an ancient Jedi archive hidden in the deep core, one that contains references to previous far outsider invasions from millennia past. The texts describe weapons and techniques developed by both Jedi and Sith working together during the galaxy's darkest hour, methods that might prove effective against the current threat. Luke's reaction to this news is complex and troubling. The idea of Jedi and Sith cooperation violates everything he has been taught about the nature of the Force and the fundamental opposition between light and dark. Yet, the alternative, the complete extinction of all life in the galaxy, forces him to consider possibilities he would once have rejected without thought. The expedition to recover the ancient archive becomes a joint Imperial resistance operation, with Luke and Ahsoka leading their respective forces in an uneasy alliance. The archive itself is located on a world that exists partially outside normal space, accessible only through Force techniques that require both light and dark side users working in harmony. The journey to the archive world proves hazardous in ways none of them expected. The space around the planet is filled with what can only be described as temporal anomalies, regions where time flows at different rates or in different directions entirely. Ships that enter these zones emerge days before they arrived, or centuries after they should have departed. Navigating such hazards requires a level of Force sensitivity and cooperation that pushes both Luke and Ahsoka to their limits. They must synchronize their abilities despite fundamental differences in training and philosophy, combining light and dark side techniques in ways that neither the Jedi nor the Sith ever contemplated. The process is painful for both of them. Luke finds his rigid adherence to Sith doctrine challenged by the need to work with someone who embodies everything the Empire has tried to destroy. Ahsoka struggles with the knowledge that the young man beside her was once Anakin Skywalker's apprentice, the Chosen One's heir who fell so far from grace. But as they work together, something unexpected begins to happen. Luke starts to remember what it felt like to use the Force for protection rather than domination, to seek understanding rather than control. The feelings are faint and fleeting, but they represent the first cracks in the psychological conditioning that has defined him for years. The archive itself proves to be a testament to the galaxy's forgotten history, a repository of knowledge from civilizations that faced extinction and found ways to survive. The texts describe the far outsiders, not as invaders, but as a kind of galactic immune system. Entities that emerge when the balance between order and chaos tips too far in either direction. According to the ancient records, the far outsiders have appeared before during periods of galactic tyranny or excessive freedom, always with the same goal: to reset the balance by eliminating the dominant civilization. They succeeded once before, erasing an empire that spanned half the known galaxy, and leaving only scattered survivors to rebuild from the ashes. But the texts also describe weapons that proved effective against the far outsiders. Devices that operated by principles combining both light and dark side techniques. These weapons couldn't destroy the aliens outright, but they could force them back into the spaces between galaxies, buying time for the survivors to establish a more balanced form of government. The knowledge contained in the archive represents hope, but hope that comes with a terrible price. Creating the anti-far outsider weapons requires the cooperation of Force users from both sides of the traditional divide, working together in ways that violate every principle both Jedi and Sith hold sacred. Luke studies the ancient texts with growing fascination and horror. The weapons described would require him to abandon much of his Sith training, to embrace techniques that draw on compassion and selfless sacrifice rather than anger and domination. It would mean acknowledging that the Emperor's philosophy is not just incomplete but fundamentally flawed. Meanwhile, on Coruscant, Palpatine faces his own crisis of faith. Reports from the archive expedition reach him through encrypted channels, and what he learns challenges everything he believes about the nature of power. The ancient texts suggest that his vision of absolute order is not a solution to galactic chaos, but one of its primary causes. The Emperor begins to understand that his empire, by eliminating all opposition and dissent, has created the very conditions that summoned the far outsiders. His perfect order is seen by the galactic balance as a form of cancer that must be excised for the greater health of the cosmos. This realization forces Palpatine to confront a terrible choice: maintain his grip on absolute power and face certain extinction, or voluntarily surrender some of that power in hopes of appeasing the cosmic forces that have sent the far outsiders. It is a decision that goes against every instinct he has developed over decades of political maneuvering and Sith training. While the Emperor struggles with his demons on Coruscant, Luke and Ahsoka work to construct the first of the ancient weapons on the archive world. The process requires them to meditate together, sharing memories and emotions in ways that break down the barriers between light and dark, empire and resistance. Through these shared meditations, Luke begins to remember his life before the fall, his time on Tatooine, his friendship with Biggs Darklighter, his growing love for a princess who represented hope in a galaxy gripped by fear. The memories are painful because they highlight how far he has fallen, how completely he has betrayed everything his younger self believed in. But the memories also awaken something in Luke that has been dormant for years: the capacity for genuine regret. For the first time since Endor, he begins to truly understand the magnitude of what he has done, the lives he has destroyed in service to the Emperor's vision. The weight of that realization threatens to crush him with despair. Ahsoka senses his struggle and offers unexpected compassion. "We all make choices we regret," she tells him during one of their working sessions. "The question isn't whether we've done terrible things, but whether we're willing to do better going forward. Your father found his way back to the light at the end. Maybe you can too." The suggestion that redemption might be possible for someone who has fallen as far as Luke challenges everything he thought he knew about the nature of good and evil. In his mind, he had crossed lines that could never be uncrossed, committed acts that placed him forever beyond forgiveness. The idea that there might still be hope for him is almost too painful to contemplate. But as the ancient weapon begins to take shape under their combined efforts, Luke finds himself changing in ways he thought impossible. The device requires him to channel both light and dark side energies, to find balance between compassion and strength, wisdom and action. It is a process that gradually strips away the rigid certainties that have defined his worldview. The first test of the completed weapon comes when a far outsider scout force attacks the archive world. Luke and Ahsoka operate the device together, their minds linked through the Force in ways that transcend traditional light-dark distinctions. The weapon fires a beam of pure, balanced energy that seems to cause the alien ships physical pain, forcing them to retreat into hyperspace rather than continue their assault. It works, but at a cost. Using the weapon requires Luke to embrace aspects of his personality that he has spent years suppressing, to acknowledge that the Empire's methods are not just ineffective against this threat, but actively counterproductive. Each time he operates the device, he becomes a little less of a Sith and a little more of something else entirely. Meanwhile, back in Imperial space, the far outsider advance continues with terrifying momentum. Coruscant itself comes under direct threat as alien fleets appear at the edge of the system, their entropy weapons beginning the process of dismantling the galaxy's political center. The Emperor faces his final hour with characteristic defiance, ordering the activation of every weapon in the Imperial arsenal despite knowing that conventional firepower will be useless against the threat. His last words, broadcast across the galaxy as far outsider entropy beams consume the Imperial Palace, are a curse upon the cosmic forces that dare to challenge his authority. Palpatine's death creates a power vacuum at the heart of the Empire, just when unified leadership is most desperately needed. Imperial Moffs begin fighting among themselves for control, their squabbles consuming resources that should be directed toward fighting the aliens. The Empire's famous efficiency collapses into chaos and internal warfare. Luke learns of his master's death while still working on the archive world, the news reaching him through Ahsoka's resistance communication networks. His initial reaction is rage at being denied the opportunity to save the man who shaped him into what he became. But gradually, that rage gives way to something more complex, a recognition that the Emperor's death might represent liberation rather than loss. Without Palpatine's controlling presence, Luke finds his thinking becoming clearer and more flexible. The psychological conditioning that kept him locked into Sith orthodoxy begins to weaken, allowing him to see possibilities he had never considered before. Chief among these is the growing realization that the Empire he served so faithfully was not a force for order, but a source of cosmic imbalance that helped summon the far outsiders. The ancient texts are clear on this point. The aliens appear when any single philosophy or system of government becomes too dominant, when the natural competition between different ideas and approaches is eliminated through force. The Empire's victory at Endor, by crushing all opposition and establishing absolute control, created exactly the conditions that the far outsiders are designed to correct. This understanding forces Luke to confront the possibility that his entire adult life has been based on a lie. The Empire he thought was bringing order to chaos was actually causing the chaos it claimed to solve. The peace he helped impose through fear and brutality was not true peace, but a form of spiritual death that the universe itself rejected. Working with Ahsoka and the other Resistance members, Luke begins to develop new weapons based on the ancient designs. Each device requires the cooperation of Force users from different traditions, emphasizing balance and harmony over dominance and control. The process is transformative for everyone involved, breaking down decades of mutual distrust and hatred. But creating enough weapons to make a difference requires resources and industrial capacity that only the Empire possesses. This necessity forces Luke into direct confrontation with the Imperial Moffs, who have divided his former master's domain among themselves. Many of these leaders view Luke as a potential threat to their newfound power. Despite his past service to the Empire, the conflict comes to a head during a meeting on the industrial world of Kuat, where Luke attempts to negotiate for shipyard access to mass-produce the anti-far outsider weapons. Moff Jerjerrod, who has claimed control of the sector, refuses to cooperate with what he calls a terrorist-influenced conspiracy and orders Luke's arrest. The battle that follows becomes a turning point in Luke's transformation. Instead of using his powers to dominate and destroy as he would have in the past, he finds himself trying to minimize casualties and preserve life. When Jerjerrod's forces open fire on civilian workers, Luke instinctively moves to protect them rather than pursue his military objectives. This choice costs him tactical advantages but saves hundreds of lives. More importantly, it represents a fundamental shift in his priorities, from achieving victory at any cost to protecting the innocent. It is a choice that his father would have been proud of, had Vader lived to see it. The Kuat operation ultimately succeeds, but at the cost of alerting other Imperial factions to Luke's activities. Soon he finds himself hunted by the very forces he once commanded, branded as a traitor and terrorist by officers who once called him Master. The irony is not lost on him. He has become what he once hunted, a rebel against the established order. But this time, the rebellion he leads has a clear and immediate goal: survival. The far outsiders continue their advance toward the galaxy's center, consuming worlds and stars with mechanical efficiency. Each day of delay costs millions of lives as entire systems are erased from existence. Working from hidden bases in the Outer Rim, Luke and his allies begin a desperate campaign to unite the galaxy's survivors against the alien threat. It is slow, dangerous work, as decades of Imperial brutality have left most people suspicious of any authority figure. Even those claiming to offer salvation. The breakthrough comes when Luke publicly renounces his allegiance to the Empire and formally apologizes for his role in its atrocities. The broadcast, transmitted across the galaxy's communication networks, shows a changed man acknowledging his past crimes and asking for forgiveness he knows he doesn't deserve. "I was wrong," he says, his words carrying the weight of years of accumulated regret. "I believed that order could be imposed through fear, that peace could be achieved through dominance. I was the Emperor's weapon, and I used that power to cause suffering on a scale that still haunts my dreams." I cannot undo what I have done, but I can try to prevent something far worse from happening to us all. The apology resonates across the galaxy in ways Luke never expected. On worlds where Imperial rule had seemed absolute, populations begin to rise up against their oppressors, not to establish chaos or seek revenge, but to join the growing alliance against the far outsiders. Luke's transformation from Sith Lord to reluctant savior becomes a symbol of hope for beings who had thought hope was dead. But redemption comes with a price. Using the ancient weapons continues to change Luke in fundamental ways, stripping away not just his Sith conditioning but aspects of his personality that had defined him since childhood. He becomes more compassionate but also more uncertain, more willing to consider other viewpoints but less decisive in crisis situations. These changes become apparent during the final battle for the galaxy's survival, when the largest far outsider fleet ever assembled moves to attack the galactic core. Luke leads a combined force of Imperial defectors, resistance fighters, and civilian volunteers in what everyone knows will be the last, desperate attempt to save their civilization. The battle spans dozens of star systems as the Alliance fleet attempts to protect worlds still containing billions of inhabitants. The far outsider forces are vast and implacable, their entropy weapons methodically dismantling the defenders' formations. Traditional naval tactics prove useless against enemies who adapt to every strategy almost instantly. Victory comes not through superior firepower or brilliant tactics, but through sacrifice and unity. Luke and dozens of other Force users link their minds across the battle zone, coordinating the ancient weapons in perfect harmony. The effort requires them to surrender their individual identities temporarily, becoming part of a larger consciousness that transcends traditional distinctions between light and dark. The combined weapon discharge creates a pulse of balanced Force energy that ripples across half the galaxy. The far outsider fleets, struck by this wave of harmonic power, suddenly cease their advance and begin retreating toward the spaces between galaxies. It is not a defeat in any conventional sense. The aliens are not destroyed or captured, but they are convinced that the galactic balance has been restored and their intervention is no longer necessary. As the far outsiders vanish into extragalactic space, Luke finds himself forever changed by the experience. The man who emerges from the battle is neither the naive farm boy who left Tatooine nor the ruthless Sith Lord who served the Empire. He is something new, shaped by both light and darkness, but defined by neither. The galaxy that survives the far outsider crisis is also transformed. The Empire's rigid hierarchy has collapsed, replaced by a loose confederation of worlds, united more by mutual necessity than ideology. There are no heroes in the traditional sense, no clear victors or defeated. There are only survivors, struggling to build something better from the ashes of what came before. Luke takes no official role in the new government, preferring to work quietly to help rebuild the institutions his actions helped destroy. He spends his remaining years establishing schools where Force users can learn to balance light and dark without falling to either extreme, training a new generation of Guardians who understand that true strength comes from harmony rather than dominance. He never fully forgives himself for the choices he made during the dark years following Endor. The memory of friends betrayed and innocents murdered continues to haunt his dreams. But he learns to live with that guilt, to transform it into a determination to do better, to ensure that the galaxy never again becomes so unbalanced that cosmic intervention is required. In the end, Luke Skywalker's story becomes a parable about the nature of redemption and the possibility of change. Even the most fallen soul can find its way back to the light, if it is willing to acknowledge its errors and work to make amends. Even the darkest victory can ultimately serve the cause of balance and hope. The galaxy remembers the Battle of Endor not as the Empire's triumph, but as the beginning of its transformation. Luke's fall and eventual redemption become legends that inspire future generations to choose wisely when faced with the eternal struggle between order and freedom, power and responsibility. But perhaps most importantly, the galaxy learns that balance is not a destination, but a process, requiring constant vigilance and adjustment. The far outsiders remain in the spaces between stars, waiting patiently for the next time the cosmic scales tip too far in any direction. Their presence serves as a reminder that no victory is permanent, no peace absolute. The universe itself demands moderation, compromise, and humility from those who would shape the destiny of worlds. It is a lesson written in the destruction of empires and the survival of hope, carved into the very fabric of space and time itself. And in the end, it is a lesson that even the galaxy's darkest moments can serve the cause of light, if those who survive them have the wisdom to learn and the courage to change. That's our theory. The Star Wars universe is a galaxy filled with exciting stories and possibilities, and we love exploring them. If you want to accompany us on this journey to a galaxy far, far away, then please like, share, and subscribe to our channel.